Ever get this feeling like, whoa, society's on a roller coaster, values changing, systems in flux, like we're holding on for dear life. Turns out, we're not alone.
Plato felt that way too, way back in ancient Greece, and that's what we're diving into today, Plato's Republic.
And not just any part, we're going deep into Book VIII, the part where Plato gets real about how societies actually change, like for real. He lays out these 5 regimes, 5 different ways societies function. But it's more than just like dry political theory. It's like he's peeling back the layers of the human soul itself.
Okay, so we're talking about a text that's been around for centuries. What makes the Republic still relevant today? I mean, isn't that like ancient history at this point? Well, think about it. Plato's wrestling with these big, timeless questions, like what does a just society even look like? How does power really work? What kind of systems help us flourish as humans? I mean, those are questions we're still grappling with today, right?
Yeah, no doubt. So let's get into it. What's the starting point? Where does Plato begin this whole breakdown of regimes?
He starts with what he calls aristocracy. It's no surprise he sees this as the ideal. Picture this. The wisest, most just people are leading, guided by like a pure love of knowledge and vision of a harmonious society. We're talking true philosopher kings, not these power-hungry dictators.
Sounds pretty utopian. Everyone's living their best life. Knowledge is flowing. Was Plato really that optimistic, though?
Here's the thing about Plato. He's a realist. He knew that even with the best of intentions, even in this ideal system, things can still go wrong. He has this amazing metaphor of the fates, these mythical beings weaving the threads of human destiny. And he says even the wisest rulers, they can miscalculate those threads.
So even the philosopher kings mess up.
They're human, after all, right?
Hmm.
And for Plato, when those in power, even the best make mistakes. When the wrong people start rising through the ranks, that's when the whole system starts to shift. And that shift, he says, leads us to the second regime, Timocracy.
Timocracy. Okay, gotta be honest, not a word you hear every day.
Definitely not your everyday word. Think of it this way. Remember Sparta, ancient Greece, that warrior culture obsessed with honor, military glory, always ready for a fight. That's Timocracy in a nutshell.
Gotcha. Starting to see the connection here. Oh, so it's not that loving honor is bad.
Exactly. It's about what happens when that becomes the dominant value in a society, when it overshadows everything else. Plato argues that in a timocracy, the pursuit of wealth, while maybe frowned upon at first, it starts bubbling beneath the surface. It's this hidden pressure valve.
Right, like you get a taste of success, maybe a little power, and suddenly you want more. It's that ambition you feel in your early career, that drive to excel. Plato gets that, but he's warning us that it can morph into something way less noble.
Precisely. And when that hunger for wealth overtakes the love of honor, that's when timocracy starts to break down, paving the way for oligarchy.
Oligarchy. Now we're talking. This is where things get a little too real, right? It's not some ancient Greek system anymore. This is where Plato's ideas start to feel, well, uncomfortably familiar.
Yeah, it's kind of eerie how relevant it still is. Plato's really clear about what defines this regime. Imagine, wealth is the ultimate measure of power. Doesn't matter what you know, doesn't matter your character, your competence, just how much you own. That's oligarchy.
And what happens to the people who can't keep up in a system like that?
They're basically pushed to the margins, right? They become invisible, the have-nots, in a system that's like totally rigged against them. And that creates this huge, unsustainable divide in the city.
It's like saying, hey, let's pick our pilots based on their bank accounts, not their actual ability to, fly a plane. What could possibly go wrong?
Plato actually uses that exact analogy. He was onto something. He knew that when you start valuing wealth over like real competence, the whole system starts to crumble from within.
And it's not just the inequality, is it? Plato talks about how these oligarchs, they get so obsessed with holding on to their wealth, it's almost like a sickness.
Totally. They're so fixated on getting more and more, but it's never really about like the greater good. It's interesting. Plato compares them to those bees, the ones that hoard all the honey for themselves. They're so busy protecting their own stash that they forget about the health of the entire hive.
It's like he's saying there's this kind of spiritual poverty at the heart of oligarchy. They might have all the material wealth in the world, but are they truly thriving? It makes you wonder about, like, those systems today that seem to put profit before people, are we, in a way, repeating history here?
It's definitely a question worth asking ourselves. And what's even more fascinating is that Plato doesn't stop there. He shows how this oligarchy, with all its flaws, it actually creates the conditions for his own downfall.
Wait, it backfires? How does that even happen?
Well, imagine all that resentment building up from those who are excluded.
Yeah.
The system's inherently unstable because it's based on this foundation of, well, this wealth. Eventually, something's got to give. It reaches a tipping point, and then boom, the pendulum swings radically in the opposite direction toward democracy.
Democracy. Finally, something we recognize, right? You'd think Plato would be all for it. Freedom, equality, those are good things.
Absolutely. But remember, Plato saw both sides of the coin. He understood the appeal of democracy, the promise of individual freedom. In fact, he uses this incredibly vivid metaphor. He describes democracy as a dazzling, multicolored robe. It's beautiful, exciting, even, but maybe, just maybe, a little too diverse, a little too chaotic.
Okay, I get you. Too many voices, too many different directions, no one really steering the ship.
Exactly. And that's the potential danger that Plato recognized. Too much freedom without any kind of balance or a shared sense of responsibility. It can spiral into disorder. It's like everyone wants to be the captain, but no one wants to follow the rules. He even goes so far as to say that even the animals in a democracy start acting up.
Hold on, the animals. You're messing with me, right?
It's a metaphor, of course. What he's getting at is this. In a democracy, even those who are typically, subservient, they start to act with this new level of freedom, testing boundaries, pushing the limits. It's as if the whole social order gets flipped on its head.
I think I get it. Too much freedom starts to erode those natural hierarchies, those structures that give society some kind of shape and order. Like that saying, familiarity breeds contempt. But are we really supposed to believe that freedom is a bad thing?
Plato's not saying freedom is inherently bad. What he is doing is highlighting the potential downsides of unchecked freedom. Think about those debates we had today about individual liberty versus collective responsibility. Right? Those tensions, they were just as real for Plato all those centuries ago.
It makes you wonder, can a society actually have too much freedom? Is there a point where it just becomes unsustainable, maybe even dangerous?
It's clearly something Plato struggled with, and this is where his analysis takes kind of a dark turn. He argues that when freedom runs wild, when there's no sense of order or restraint, people actually start yearning for a strong man, someone to come in and take control, almost like the pendulum swinging back in the other direction.
So they're so overwhelmed by the chaos of all this freedom that they're actually willing to give it up in exchange for stability, even if it means sacrificing some of their own individual liberties.
It's a dangerous trade-off, but Plato believes it's one that happens all too often. And that, my friend, is how democracy, in his view, paves the way for tyranny.
Tyranny. Okay, yeah, this is it. This is the big one. The one Plato definitely saw as the ultimate nightmare scenario. Not just a bad system, but the complete opposite of everything he believed in.
And he really lays it bare, doesn't sugarcoat it at all. He describes how these tyrants, they come to power often by acting like protectors, the only ones who can bring back order and security, save everyone from the chaos. Sound familiar?
Oh, yeah. It's the oldest trick in the book, promise the world, promise freedom, and then bam, oppression. It's like we've seen this same story play out again and again throughout history.
Sadly, yeah, it's a pattern. And Plato, he tells us exactly what to look for. Once these tyrants get a grip on power, the mask comes off. They turn on anyone who challenges them, anyone they see as a threat, and they rule through fear. Plain and simple.
Chilling, right. Makes you realize how fragile this whole thing is, this freedom we talk about. How easily we can fall for these quick fixes, these strongman solutions to problems that are so much bigger than any one person. It's we forget freedom takes work. It takes all of us being vigilant, willing to stand up for it, even when it's hard.
That's exactly what Plato's getting at. But what makes it even more, unsettling is this. He connects this whole tyranny thing back to each of us. It's not just about some bad guys out there. It's a reflection of something deeper, something about human nature itself.
Wait, hold up. You're saying there's a little tyrant lurking inside all of us. That's not really the kind of pep talk I was expecting today.
Okay, hear me out. Remember earlier we were talking about how each of these regimes, they're like a mirror to the human soul, different ways of being. Well, for Plato, the tyrannical soul, it's a soul that's totally enslaved by its own desires. Ruled by them, really.
So all those unchecked appetites we were talking about, that hunger for more, that actually leads to a kind of inner tyranny.
You got it. Imagine those desires, not just for wealth or power, but for anything and everything. They're constantly screaming for attention, demanding to be satisfied no matter the cost. And that chaos inside, that lack of self-control, it's like looking in a mirror at a tyrannical state. They're reflections of each other.
Whoa, okay. So if someone's constantly giving in to every whim, every little desire, they're like on the road to becoming a tyrant, even
Yeah.
if it's just in their own life. That's a lot to process.
And to really drive this point home, Plato uses this really intense image. He says that a ruler, once they've tasted even a single drop of human blood, they become like that wolf in the old Arcadian myth.
Oh man, you mean the one where the king gets turned into a wolf?
Yeah.
Right, and then from that moment on, he's cursed. All he craves is human flesh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Gruesome, I know. But see, Plato's using that myth to show how power, it warps you. That first act of cruelty, of violence, it changes something deep down in your soul. It creates this hunger that can never be satisfied.
It's like an addiction, right? Addicted to power, to having control, and that need, that hunger, it poisons everything. Relationships, your sense of self. It's like they become a prisoner to the worst parts of themselves.
And just like that tyrannical individual, so focused on their own needs, the tyrannical state, it becomes all-consuming too. Everything has to be about control, crushing anyone who disagrees, anyone who questions things. And in the end, it collapses. It just can't sustain itself.
So that's Plato's warning then. That's the ultimate endpoint of this whole journey through the regimes.
In a way, yeah. But I think it's more than just a warning. It's a call to action. He's reminding us we can't just sit back and be passive. Plato wants us to be engaged, to be critical thinkers, to stand up and challenge injustice wherever we see it.
So it's not enough to just like read about these regimes, analyze them from a safe distance. We actually have to be out there in the world putting these ideas into practice.
100%. It starts with each of us. Looking at our own lives, our own choices, and asking those tough questions. What do we really value? What kind of world do we want to be a part of? And not just for ourselves, but for everyone.
That's a powerful note to end on. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Plato's Republic, I'm going to leave you with this. Take a look around at the world today. Really look. What kind of regime do you see? And more importantly, what role are you playing in shaping it?